This is a Global Energy Network podcast.
Hi, Sam. Thank you for joining us today. If you can just tell us who you are and what it is you do.
Excellent. Thanks, Kenny. So I'm Sam Long. I'm Chief Executive Officer for Decommissioning. So we're a specialist trade association, probably the original trade association that looked into the act of decommissioning oil, gas, nuclear, renewables.
Yeah. And where did you grow up? Are you an Aberdeen guy?
I think the answer to that is quite obvious. All right, so Sam hails from southwest England, kind of Bristol, Gloucester area. I came from a farming family, and somewhat ironically, I had a girlfriend whose father was Shell in London, and I think I ended up in a conversation with him, and he said something like, "Go to Aberdeen, you'll have an adventure." I wanted to work in an industry. I wanted to farm, but was very much forced out of it. Right now, with inheritance issues in farming, we would be one of those families who are going, "What are we going to do?"
Yeah.
So I was very much told, you have to go get another job. So a real job. This is my real job, Kenny.
Yeah.
There I am in my real job.
Okay.
In my head, I'm still farming.
Okay. And is your family still in farming?
No, we sold up and quit like many others. And it's really ironic, isn't it? Because here in the northeast of Scotland, I live in an ex-farmhouse surrounded by other families who've all sold up as well.
Yeah.
So there's a risk here. We head off on a different kind of policy and politics position. But I actually, in oil and gas, you find a lot of farming folk. You find a lot of people who make transitions. Here, I would absolutely agree with that. A lot of the innovation came from agriculture.
Yeah, we done a podcast with James Gregg, who from Motive, and he's his family or dad was ex-farming, and he used one of the sheds from that to actually get going. So that I think that's a massive part of here. What kind of farming was it? Was it dairy or cattle?
No, we were mixed, so a combination of kind of beef and potatoes and wheat and other crops like that. Yeah. But relatively small. It would have been very, very difficult to keep it going right now.
Okay. And then you mentioned off camera, so your dad was a farmer, but you mentioned off camera that your dad was away filming.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into that one in a bit more detail. So if I peel back the layers, right? So Sam is not an engineer. Sam's an environmental manager by background. And so the point you're alluding to is that actually my father worked in television. In particular, he worked in the Natural History Unit in Bristol doing kind of environmental and the early ecological programs. So everything with David Attenborough, Life on Earth, Planet on Earth, these things. And so I think I wanted to farm. I was quite keen on the environment, but I knew I wanted to work in industry, if that's the right, makes sense. There was a master's here in Aberdeen that very much suited that kind of piece about what is that conflux. But the interesting piece at the end of my master's was I wanted to work in oil and gas. I'd had this girlfriend's dad who said, Shell, Aberdeen.
Place to be,
right?
Yeah.
Cutting edge, doing things you'll never do elsewhere. And truth is, you get off a train one day, you walked out of that harbour, and it was just heaving. And you were like, I want a piece of that. It was amazing. And, I'm of an age where my first real exposure to oil and gas was probably Piper.
Okay.
And being unaware of that, but I was a 10, 11-year-old individual at the time. So I knew that we had this industry, but I knew nothing about it.
And something like that didn't deter you from it, if that was your first memory of it?
No, I think what was being undertaken in the North Sea was it was mind-boggling. It was technically advanced.
As far as engineering?
Yeah, just the whole enterprise of we were doing this, we were pushing the envelope for what could be done, and I found that deeply attractive. The truth is, though, when I graduated, the barrel price was weak, $7, $8. So it was one of those classic cycles in Aberdeen where it's actually really, really difficult to get a job. So I ended up working for...
So what year was that?
Wow, you're talking 97, something like that, right? So I actually ended up on a graduate scheme for a large company doing kind of quarrying, road building, construction throughout the UK. I'd also met my wife-to-be, so I was quite keen to get back to Scotland.
What happened to the girl?
Say again.
What happened to the first girl?
What happened to the first girl? Let's not talk about that. That was over by then.
Yeah, didn't need her dad anymore.
Yeah, her dad had made a good suggestion. That's fine. Let's move on. So I think I ended up working in the Central Belt. And with my rather plum English accent, that was a bit of a learning curve. Working with a bunch of guys who would say, blues are hoops. Yeah. That was culturally completely alien to me. So I was really excited when I did get an opportunity in Aberdeen eventually. So around 2000, I joined Wood. I was Wood's first ever environmental manager. Remembering, of course, at the time it was called Wood Group rather than
What was the reason then for them bringing that sort of role into the business?
Let's be honest, I suppose at that point in time, Piper had initiated a better safety culture. But on the back of that, we're coming through the environmental issues. We were moving from safety into H, S, and E, but
Yeah.
you needed people who could talk that language.
Yeah.
I will say the early days for environmental professionals in oil and gas were really challenging.
In what way?
Culturally.
Okay.
You weren't an engineer.
You weren't welcomed.
You weren't particularly welcomed. It could be quite adversarial. You had to prove your value. And here's an interesting reflection for you, was in the early 2000s when we, as an environmental kind of operator and supply chain group, you would have conversations where you knew that climate change would eventually come back and bite the industry.
Yeah.
But nobody could find the right way of progressing that topic. So a lot of the early days focus was on waste management and efficiencies onshore and offshore. We knew that carbon was there, but it was, the tools weren't there to articulate it, and cultural, societal acceptance of climate change wasn't strong enough.
Yeah.
So I think,
Do you think it is now?
yes.
Okay.
But the
From
sad
within
thing-
the industry, not from
both.
from the news.
Industry, here's an interesting, we're diving straight into it, but maybe that's what you want, Kenny. Even before COVID, there was a fair bit of work being done on decarbonisation, electrification of assets.
Yeah.
We knew, for instance, in the UK that our emissions per barrel lifted were far, far higher than they are, say, in Norway and other basins. We knew that that was coming.
Yeah.
Many people think the energy transition only really got going in COVID, and that's a bit of a falsehood. It was building steam all the way through the 2010s. It was something that was coming forward.
That early.
Yes, to me, it's an inevitability.
Yeah.
But the energy transition itself, it's $1 trillion effort that's going to take decades. Any talk about achieving this in 5-10 years is just
ridiculous.
short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back. So your earlier career there, coming in, there was Petrofac, Aker, Wood Group, all the EPCs.
Yeah, I joined Wood, and I had a very North Sea orientated time. I progressed through QHSE combined kind of roles, and I began to appreciate the importance of the safety piece. I was working with individuals who had dealt with the aftermath of Piper, and obviously you've had Steve Ray come through recently. And so that was a real kind of trips offshore, that awareness of you're working in a high hazard industry.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important we don't forget that. But the environmental piece was kind of coming up through parity. So yes, I started to, the interesting thing about my skill set was very early on in Wood, they went decommissioning. Right?
Okay.
And so I have never shook it off. It's
Yeah.
always been part of my career. And that was, the team I had joined had not only dealt with Piper Alpha, but they had also done Brent Spar as a decommissioning. And Brent Spar is the first really visceral, visible project in the decommissioning space for oil and gas in the North Sea. There were others. And it was recognized that with an environmental background, I spoke the right language. I had a good understanding of the issues that were associated with it. And so I moved on into looking like early days feeds for Northwest Hutton and other projects. You mentioned the other EPCs, but actually, interestingly, I completed my MBA here in Aberdeen.
Okay.
And then I went to work for Baker Hughes.
Right.
And I joined a turnkey drilling team here in Aberdeen. And that was phenomenal because suddenly I'd gone from having very, very North Sea experience to being truly global. Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Russia, places that many here in the North Sea or many in the oil and gas industry, you do this piece where suddenly you're very, very international in your scope and you're doing.
It's a very key part of this industry, the fact how global the industry is and the opportunities that are there.
But also a sense of timing. So we are going through and see the tail end of what's called the Great Crew Change, right? And that was a Society of Petroleum Engineering phraseology that I really picked up on. Many of my early mentors have now have actually retired or beyond retirement. And there was a big trend going on. There was a recognition that we were moving people around the world, but we were particularly moving Europeans and Americans around the world rather than developing national content. And so there was also, whilst I was at Baker, there was this big recognition that you needed Angolans, you needed Nigerians, you needed Venezuelans. And so that was part of the process, was mixing people around the world and bringing them together. Now, whether that's happening now, I'm not so sure.
It's a bit more difficult now, isn't it? Because these countries now have local content pieces and everything else that, that you need to be employing Angolans or Ghanaians or whatever it is, depending on where you are in the world. And it's harder for our companies here, the supply chain here, or the operators here, to get more involved there because either they need more money, more investment. also there's a question of when they get a return on that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more challenges now.
Yeah, I think any assumption that everything's cool in the Northeast and we can just work international, we really need to reflect, what are the costs of doing business international?
Yeah.
How much work can you do remotely? Now, many of the supply chain clearly are at the moment doing a very, very good job of working internationally. But we're all also navigating the energy transition. So what do services look like in the future? We also have a dichotomy at the moment between a growth in global oil and gas, decline in domestic oil and gas, and then hopes and expectations in the energy transition space of what's coming around the corner.
Yeah, we asked 70 business owners or managing directors from the supply chain, including Serica Energy, Technip, CNR, and the Port of Aberdeen. We asked all of them, what's your view on, first of all, how much business are you doing that's non-oil and gas? And over 40% was less than 15%. And then we also asked, are you either doing work abroad already? Have you transferred assets internationally, or are you looking at that? And 89% of the people we asked were either already working abroad or very much looking at that at the moment. So very less than 10% or just over 10% were very much fixed on the North Sea.
So as a trade association lead, one of my jobs is that kind of government interface and representing industry and advocating for it. One of our very, very strong signals at the moment is exactly the points you're making. We have members who are up to 90% reliant on overseas activity. Does that underline a decline in UK activity? To me, it underlines the need for government to recognize that it's quite a fragile supply chain. It has developed a skill set and a capability within the UK and the North Sea that is well regarded. From a decommissioning perspective, export is utterly the future. Utterly the future is wrong. It is going to be a very, very component of what's going around the corner, because people want to have what we have here and what we've done here. It's probably always been that way, right? The supply chain, the supply chain that is built up in the northeast of Scotland, absolutely, its brownfield, its greenfield, and its decom capabilities have always been desired elsewhere. We've done. I came here because it was the cutting edge, right? And it's amazing to support that and be part of that.
But we're seeing that. I spoke to someone at Adura a couple of weeks ago. They were telling me during the Christmas period they had a problem offshore. They contacted TWMA to get whatever it was they required, and that kit wasn't available anymore. It's all been shipped to the Middle East, and they're now looking at building a supply chain in Romania, Poland, and other parts of the world, which obviously they still have operations here and they need to do that. But that's quite worrying, and a lot of the yards that you used to see a lot of kit in Aberdeen, you don't see any kit in anymore, because they can get rental revenue in the Middle East or in Asia or whatever, so they're shipping that kit across and then it's not coming back here.
I'm a big fan of kicking the tires. As a decom practitioner and as an advocate for the region, we run, not the region, for that skill set. At our events, we like to say, bring your kit. And,
show off.
And so at our annual event, Decom Week, or at Decom Live, which quite often we run with the likes of with Bob and team at the port here in Aberdeen, I'm constantly saying to people, bring your kit, have it on display so that a project manager or a project engineer can come in and see it. We can talk about how it works downhole or craneage or logistics or cutting technologies. I love all that, but you're fundamentally right. We will say to people, exhibit it for free because I acknowledge that you have a cost to bring it to you. And many of them will say, I'd love to, but actually it's not in country at the moment.
I don't have it
available. I will be relatively serious on one note here, though. For the UK siesta and for the long run of Decom, it does present a risk.
It does. We sat in a GUH breakfast at Subsea Expo a couple of weeks ago, and I think we had Serica Energy on that breakfast, and
Boskalis
and flotation.
Stuart and Barry and team.
Talking about their project coming up in 2029, and they will need a lot of the supply chain here, specifically because it was a subsea event, specifically subsea supply chain companies. And when we get to 2029, what supply chain are they going to be speaking to? So if it continues like it is right now?
At Subsea Expo, run by our lovely pals at Global Underwater Hub, we ran the Decom seminar on day 2, and we got all the way through to the end of a 2-hour session, and I won't name the individual, but they're prominent in the supply chain, made a point of standing up at the back of our audience and saying to me, Sam, what supply chain is going to be left in 5 years' time in the UK? Right? And I understand that individual has ploughed much money and capital in to build businesses and probably feels personally aggrieved, and I get that. And it is my job and the job of other trade associations to talk to Department of Trade, Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and others and try and convey some of these concerns at the moment. The truth is, for decommissioning, the absence of rigs to do the kind of subsea P&A, as you're saying, the other capabilities, the tools, the people, they have to play in that global market in order to sustain themselves. The irony is, UK is the #1 decommissioning market in the world, and yet it doesn't have enough work to actually sustain and retain the experience.
The asset, the people.
There's always a trade-off. So we're doing a piece of work at the moment with Department of Business, Trade and Energy Industries Council, which talks to exactly your point. We're trying to build a sales brochure for UK capability. If we are the cutting edge of it, there's an acknowledgement that the export and trade of that needs support. We get good support from Scottish Development International as well as Department of Business and Trade. The international piece is a key part of my role, is to explain to people, you need to play the international card.
Yeah, it needs to be part of it.
I think the one thing you and I haven't talked about yet, though, is clearly my job is to talk Decom, is that Decom is part of the energy transition, right? It's a bridge activity. There's a lot of interest at the moment about how many skills, how many jobs can we retain, what are the opportunities, how many members of the supply chain can be active in decommissioning.
Yeah.
I will never make out that everybody in the supply chain and every job is going to work in Decom. We've been very clear with the likes of Treasury, Department of Energy Security, that please don't make an assumption that if we decom the North Sea, everybody is going to be happy, right? It just doesn't work that way. But it will retain what is needed. There's a lot of discussions with other agencies and bodies about how do we ensure the ports, the yards, the vessels are here for exactly that need, for floating, for Barry and his team. For Stuart is very clear. For Boskalis, decommissioning is 60 to 70% of his revenue in the North Sea. It is what keeps him right here now, with an end goal of trying to get to. See, earlier on when I talked about decarbonisation was going on and electrification was actually really going on in the 2010s and being talked about and looked at, but most people weren't aware of it. Yeah. That's why this is a continuation of.
Well, I remember going to a Decom North Sea training event. It must have been about 2013. It was a 2-day event. And I think Decom North Sea must have been making a killing from those training events, because I think they were full every time they put them on. And it was about £1,500 or something for a Decom training course. And I can't remember the 2 guys who done the course. 2 guys who'd been involved in early decommissioning work in the 1980s, I think. But it was kind of stretched out for 2 days to justify, I guess, the £1,500 fee. But I think every time they'd done it, it was full. And we had, obviously, at that time, we were going through a bit of a downturn in the industry. And everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. I remember going to a Decom North Sea event. One of the first ones I think they did at St Andrews. And there was loads of companies that were Decom something or Decom division. I remember seeing a guy from Stanley in America stand up, and I think he destroyed the conference, because he basically just told all these companies, it's not going to happen. You'll all be out of business by the time the decommissioning work starts. So there's been a lot of people waiting on this decom industry for 10, 15, 11 years or so. So it's been a long time coming, I think, for a lot of companies and a lot of people.
So remember that I've lived that. As a decom professional, I'm very aware of how this market waxes and wanes. The counter to that is there's almost an inevitability to it.
It has to happen.
Right. There's only so long you can maintain an asset that's made of metal in a corrosive environment.
Yeah.
And also, it gets politically used as a bit of a football, but the basin has been in decline for a while, right? Yeah. And so there comes a point where the technical limit and the economic limit for an asset are breached. What we're really seeing with UK current policy is just an acceleration of the economic limit. They have made the fiscal situation much harder than it was previously.
Yeah.
And that has to some degree accelerated a tendency towards decommissioning. I think here's a kind of a quip or a side story. Last year, I think I got stopped in Heathrow by an individual who went, "You just want to decom everything, right?" And I actually stopped and went, hey, that's just not realistic. A, it can't physically happen. B, it's in nobody's interest if we just decommission everything. If we did it all at the same time, the costs will go up and the operator won't be willing to pay for it. The taxpayer has got a part of this through a relief mechanism. People think the taxpayer role in it is probably bigger than it is, but it is part of it. And so it has always been a balancing act between cost and price.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, where we are right now, the economic driver to do it is progressing. But we do need to remember underneath this all, how long can you keep an asset alive in that environment?
Well, CNR obviously going to make a few changes there. I think they've got the Pioneer and Spirit coming back after its 6-month trip in Australia, I think, and then that'll be back here.
Yeah.
But I went to an S&P event the other week, last week I think, and they were talking about the number of vessels that are available. There's just a huge shortage of vessels.
And day rates are correspondingly high, right?
Yeah, well, they're climbing up. If you've got a lack of boats, the price goes up. They were talking about where are these vessels going to come from? We need more vessels. Who's going to buy the vessels? Who's going to spend money on them? And well, there's no interest from the companies who own the boats because they've got a good price just now. If they flood the market with more vessels, their price comes down. So there's a lot more challenges there to just gone and planning these decommissioning plans in.
I think you reminded me though, so, we can have politicians come through an electoral cycle, they can be top dog, win, and come in and say, well, I think we should just do X, Y, and Z, and then you're like, Minister, I need to just remind you, this is a global market.
Yep. Everybody's fighting over the same thing.
It's private capital that's doing it for you. You can't just pull a string and instruct everyone to go down that way. And so, we do a lot of work now with the renewables community as well, trying to improve their understanding of the challenge, the technical challenge. They ask interesting questions around the economics of it as well. Why does this happen in oil and gas? And we will explain them to them. And then nuclear decom. So it's interesting. You mentioned Pioneer and Spirit. Pioneer and Spirit is an amazing asset. I've never been on her. Beautiful, beautiful. My colleagues have. And many in this industry, some in this industry will have experience of working with her. But it's a €3 billion investment by one family. It is a game changer, but it only does less than 5% of the value of decom. Does that make sense, right? But it is like the totem. Everybody wants to talk about Pioneer and Spirit. 50% of all of this is in the wells, right? Yeah. And it doesn't get much glamour. Yeah. It's downhole, it's not very visible, and it's technically very challenging. So almost everywhere I go in the world, people will say to me, what do you think about Pioneer and Spirit? Amazing, utterly amazing. But it is only doing one portion of a market that's worth about, for oil and gas alone, $10 to $15 billion per annum. Yeah. And there's 40 years worth of work, depending on where some of the new gas developments, places like Guyana, when will they be entering decom? We don't even talk about that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
It's too far down the line. Yeah. So for companies then who are looking at getting into decom, I think you hear a lot in this industry as you've missed the boat, whether that be renewables or decom or moving your business to the Middle East or whatever it is. But how does a company then from the supply chain in the UK understand where their option or opportunity is within that market, and how do they get into that market?
I think you mentioned earlier, so you talked about Decom North Sea. Clearly, Decom mission, when I took it over, it felt like it needed a rebrand and a refresh. So I think the straight answer to your question is that's what we're here for, right? We're a not-for-profit trade association that gives guidance and advice. How do you enter that market? What is the right strategy? Where is the activity? What does it look like? And at the end of the day, I quite like the idea that we're a not-for-profit. It means that my board are there for governance to say, this is the right thing to do for the industry, right? Yeah. This is the right support. This is what we do. Your earlier reference to things that might have happened 10, 15 years ago, I would tend to agree. After the financial crisis of 07 and 08, when we went into kind of the next down cycle in oil and gas, decommissioning felt like it was hot to trot, right? Yeah. And many people will have gone, I'm investing, and then gone, oh, the work's not here. But it's like plenty of other forms of industry. It just matures, it moves on. Right now, I would describe decommissioning in the North Sea as a relatively mature activity set. Yeah. And that means that's why we're of attraction to other regions around the world who are going, I really need that capability. Yeah. People are physically flying to Aberdeen to meet people. We had a Brazilian delegation last week. We've had a Bruneian delegation in January. Australia is here all of the time. Yeah. And they're trying to make it very, very clear to members and non-members and people in the industry, we have work for you, please come and support it. So I think new entrants, we're always happy to talk to them, we're always happy to give them a bit of guidance. They've just got to, at the end of the day, the clue's in the name, right? Yeah. We're in the energy transition. Yeah. We're still, you know, and I know, and many viewers will know that oil and gas is here for a long, long time to go. But that climate change stuff, it's not going away. Yeah. Right. And so there's an inevitability to the decommissioning. There's an inevitability to the fact that we have to go through the transition. It's just the pace of the transition that's really the issue. So
on the renewable side, then, how quickly or how closely are you working with Renewable UK or Scottish Renewables?
So both parties we work with quite happily. The truth is, here is a industry within the energy sector that has been encouraged to build out on its lowest cost model. Yeah. Now it's got to some level of maturity with the first series of offshore farms that were built. Remember, onshore has already been doing decommissioning for a while. We've done 2 to 3 projects already been done in Scotland. Slightly different take on how it's done, but a similar supply chain. But in the offshore world, Renewables UK and Scottish Renewables are aware, as are their members, they've got some issues coming around the corner. Yeah. My concern would be they have built out under CFD to bring into a regulated market really, really cheaply. Did they and their regulators look at them and go, have we really built in the cost of decom? And that's where we're working with them all at the moment, is to try and get a better
guidance.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't have to be technical guidance. There's some interesting barriers here. You know, you have to think about the right language. You can't go to a renewables community and just throw the words around, well, this is what we do in oil and gas, because there'll be a natural pushback on that. But that's why, again, Decom has got this nice bridge piece. I was in Sellafield last week. It's a fascinating site. Lots and lots of challenges. Nuclear decom in the UK, 4 billion sterling per annum.
And what kind of lessons can you take from that and bring into this?
That's a large part of what we do. Yeah. So, and it's not just nuclear into oil and gas, it's oil and gas into nuclear. We draw a Venn diagram, right? We draw a lovely Venn diagram. We call it the imperfect Venn diagram. Okay. And we talk about how oil and gas and renewables and decommissioning, they quite overlap with each other, particularly for the offshore, because it's the use of the same supply chain. Nuclear stands off a little bit because it is onshore rather than offshore. But I tell you what, you get to the outer variables and drivers, guess what? You have HMG involvement, you have treasury involvement. The same capital is the same skill sets, project management, finance. And so we talk about that as the kind of, that's how to view it. And also, we have a national infrastructure estimate of 750 billion of what we need to do in coming decades, right? Yep. We don't have enough people to do that. We don't have enough people for the energy transition. And so people are going to have to build careers, in my mind, where I'm not just an oil and gas professional. It'll be, I might do a bit of nuclear. Yeah. We quite often get asked about the jobs. What's happening with the jobs? Where are the jobs going? Yeah. What can I do in decom as a job? We work with Skills Development Scotland. We talk to...
But I think that's the same in energy or oil and gas as a wider thing, isn't there? I think people think of it as engineering or maybe dismantling, but there's everything. There's accounts, there's chemists, there's everything that you could get anywhere else. There's a requirement here.
So the decom is just the end of the life cycle of the asset, right? It's just the final phase. And many people in their careers, I don't know about you, I've never worked on a greenfield project. I probably would have loved to have. I probably would have loved to have, to work on a Johansford drop or something like that. A mega project would have been amazing, but I haven't. Yeah. And I've worked a lot on the decom end of it. It isn't super sexy. Jokingly, it's the job of a 50-year-old male man to go, yeah, hey, it's sexy, get in there. But we can joke, that's my job.
See you at retirement.
Hopefully. Let's see. I mean, actually, when you put the two together, nuclear, holy cow, I mean, that's a centuries-long task. Yeah. But with really, really similar technical challenges. So in there recently, I saw a stunning paper 2 years ago where they put divers in the ponds in Sellafield, right? Wow. And that hadn't been done for 40 years. But what we do now is talk to diving businesses in the North Sea and say, how interested would you be in working in nuclear environments? Yeah. Right? And for many people, it's an eye-opener. Yeah. And so we work to ensure that there's commonality and crossover. That's because, to me, you said earlier how much of this work is overseas and what is the value of the domestic work. And we encourage our members to think about all three of them. Renewables is clearly of interest. Many of the supply chain in oil and gas want to work in renewables and are already working in it.
Yeah.
If you have installed it, you're likely to have a role in uninstalling it and removing it.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to educate people, share knowledge. What is best practice? What are the risks? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And encourage it. At the end of the day, my job is to advocate for decommissioning that is safe, cost effective, creates employment, and is good for the environment. If we can get all those things done, what's wrong with it?
Yeah, we're doing well.
Yeah.
So we'll forget all that and we'll go back to you.
Yeah.
So, because we kind of went off on a tangent
We
there.
bypassed.
But, so you went to Wellbore for a short period of time.
Yep.
So they kind of popped up for us, I think just before Offshore Europe 2020, 21, something like that. I'd never heard of them before. American investment, was that right?
Yeah.
So you ended up there for a period of time before going to decommission. What was the transition there? Because they kind of came from nowhere.
Yeah, if you wind the clock back 20 years ago, think about what we looked at. We had UKOA, so we had UK Offshore Operators Association, and then we had OCA, was the Offshore Contractors Association. And, you know, there were large engineering houses and there was a large supply chain, but it wasn't as diverse as it is now. We didn't have the specializations that we have right now. And also, private capital hadn't quite flowed in the same way. And I suppose in that 20-year period, we've seen things happen like Roan Capital coming in and buying Wellbore. That is a spin out, not a spin out, but a buyout of parts of what was Schlumberger. Yeah. So what you're actually asking me probably more is, what was Schlumberger up to? Yeah. Schlumberger had decided that here was an oil and gas product line that they no longer wanted, right? And a private equity house had said, I'll take that and see what we can do with it. Yeah. The challenge for that team was they had done that on the 31st of December 2019.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they had walked unknowingly into all of the associated risks around COVID.
Yeah.
And that was a brutal period for businesses, eh? So a startup business in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, because they had such huge grand plans. I remember speaking to them, like, must have been early 21 or late 2020, and they were going to be employing thousands of people. A huge plan, but that never really happened. But I guess COVID had a massive impact on that.
Yeah, you know, there are parts of your career where you learn some really, really sharp and acute lessons. You go, well, cool, if I had a chance and I went back again, would you do that? Would it do differently? But the unknowns in life are really, really challenging. Yeah. And they can, doesn't matter how strong your business is, everybody took a hit in COVID.
Yeah, you learn, yeah.
And it has definitely adjusted individuals, it has adjusted careers, but it has also adjusted enterprises. And what I do find fascinating is the energy transition, because many people associate that with us when the energy transition started to happen. And I'm determined to say to people, no, this is something that has been going on for a long time, right?
Yeah, it's not a new thing.
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
What about just come back to the EPC companies and the bakers? What kind of culture was within those businesses then?
How
different were they?
So I'm going to tell a slightly different story, but it will resonate with a Scottish and North East Scottish audience, but also from an international perspective. I remember one of my early big memories of Wood Group is going to what was called Sigma 3.
Okay.
Right? And Sigma 3 was doing the Brent project. And basically we were converting Brents from oil production to gas production and doing blowdown and repressurization. You would go into I think it was the Phase 3 building up in Shell and Alton's. There was 3,000 people working on that project as a joint venture between Wood, AMEC, and I'm going to forget, maybe Foster Wheeler.
Yeah.
But as a youngster walking into industry who'd been told, go to Aberdeen and have an adventure, to walk through those doors and find those people doing that was just amazing. It was the sheer complexity of what was being proposed, using technologies and techniques and engineering computing from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It felt cutting edge, but now you look back and you go, God, it was quite agricultural.
Yeah.
But you're asking me, what is the change? Well, the change is, think about who I've just named. Wood, AMEC, Foster Wheeler.
Yeah.
They've had good, they've had bad.
Yeah.
The world looks radically different for many of these people.
Yeah.
And I think in hindsight, what's really interesting is, if we talked earlier about there is an inevitability, you are producing a finite resource, you will be in decline, and the basin has been in decline since about 2001. if you sit in a corporate world and you naively think this is all just going to carry on for year after year,
it's a gravy train.
yeah, that's not true.
Yeah.
And I think one of my absolute sharing, you and I were talking somewhat earlier about our own children. I wouldn't want my children to encounter the ups and downs that we have had, this town has had, in terms of commodity cycles and the pain.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
It's not pleasant.
But it is part of this industry.
Yes. And so the question is, were the trade-offs worth it for the ups?
Well, you would say no.
Right now, in this town, you would say no.
Yeah.
I was speaking to a third party recently, won't name names, who is has a key role in what's going to happen in the future, but isn't an oil and gas professional.
Okay.
And they were expressing shock with me as to the state of Aberdeen, and you couldn't believe the amount of capital that's gone through this town.
So how did we get it so wrong then? When you look at Stavanger, you fly across to Stavanger versus here, what went wrong?
Here's a question, Quinny. Do you know what Liquorland is?
No.
Have you watched State of Happiness?
No.
It's a beautiful, beautiful documentary drama series that was produced by the Norwegian broadcaster.
Okay.
It's broadcast in the BBC as well. And what Liquorland paints is Stavanger in the 60s, 70s and 80s. It is dramatised. We've had books in Aberdeen that are dramatised about how did oil and gas come along. But it is, if you are a resident of North East Scotland and you watch that series, you'll realise the same societal and community impact was going on here at the time. The farming families were being drawn into, and the fishing families, and the trawlermen and the trawler builders. Could you give me a boat? What does it look like? It is all in this series, right? Where it talks about rapidly, and in Norway, clearly, they have the social construct in the Scandinavian nations is quite different from where we are. So they did choose to have a wealth fund. I think many people, I wasn't really old enough, but I did work with that earlier generation. In our current political cycle, and where we are with the energy transition, I think many people fail to remember oil and gas paid for the welfare bills of the UK for decades, right? And when the UK was really struggling, Thatcher spotted a commercial opportunity to make money and reindustrialize the UK. And it's done amazing things. Why did my girlfriend's father say, go to Aberdeen, you'll have no venture? Because it was happening here. We were spending 10, 15 billion per annum pumping it offshore in order to produce hydrocarbons. It was go, go, go. And I found that fascinating. And as we said earlier, I then went to work for Baker and travel the world and do very much the same things. And that's an amazing part of my life, is to have done all of that. And it does create pride. But you're right, the upside, did we really, really foresee?
Do we maximize it?
We might not have had a choice because the money had to go elsewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. It's not ideal at the moment when you look out the window.
I do feel, I am never going to sound like an Aberdonian, but I do feel sad for my city. There are those, Bob Keeler and others, who are fighting hard. And good on them. And yourselves for investing in a business here, right? Of visceral premises, trying to drive things forward. You either fight for it or you lose it. And so let's fight for it.
Well, you've got no choice, you're in it. So you just have to get on with it.
But you don't have to, right? Do you?
No, you don't, but you want to.
Yes. I think some do and some don't. So I talked about jobs earlier. We get asked questions like, how many people do you think from oil and gas will be made unemployed and could go and work in nuclear? Or, will Decom do we need new skill sets and new training and new qualification for people to be decommissioning? No, we need engineers who are going to do decommissioning, right? Yeah. That's what we need.
And all UK have got the job passport. And that seems to have struggled so far to get any real pickup.
I would agree. And I could almost be a critic, but I probably don't know enough to be a full critic of it. Well intended, but I don't think it's hitting all the bullets. But let's be hitting all the points. But let's be truthfully honest. The pace of the energy transition is not what was expected. Right? And so we are not creating employment and economic activity in the renewables community. So we talked about having a skills passport that enables people to go from one activity to another. Right. I speak to the teams who are dealing with, and I knew individuals who worked at Grangemouth. Moss Moran is coming around the corner. Without saying too much, we gave early heads up to certain individuals that Moss Moran will fall.
Yeah.
And people would go, no, what are you talking about? And you're kind of like, actually, this is my job.
I've seen this.
Is to know what's coming around the corner. So in the reskilling piece, people talk about, can we be reskilled? And what we do see is, I know personally of friends, and I think it's the right thing to do. Sizewell C, Hinckley C, these are mega projects, big employment opportunities. And I have encouraged people who have come out of Decom. If you, in a Decom project, there are going to be people who are Decom professionals who do Decom, and then everybody who probably is associated with an offshore asset will go through Decom once, but they may end up redundant on the end of it. Does that make sense? Some people stay and do other Decom projects, but the sad truth is when we decommission an asset, people's livelihoods are affected, they're done, right? And so we do get asked a lot, what could I do in my career? Where can I go next? Where can I get training and advice? I have had people in my network who've had a look at, well, I could go to Hinckley. The salaries are comparable. Yeah. But once you start putting in the travel cost and everything else, then they kind of go, actually, how affordable is it on a cash flow basis? So you were asking me earlier about the city and people, we live in our city, we can protect it. We need to remember people can leave our city.
They can. I think people who have lived here for a long time, and we've seen this quite a lot in the last couple of years, people have ended up now in a negative equity position when it comes to their property. And if you, again, look out the window and how things are looking right now, you would think that's going to continue and maybe be more challenging for people just to pick up and leave, whereas at certain times in the past, you could have
easy
buggered off, put that out for let, kept that running, making extra money. Those days are long gone now.
Do you not? This is contentious. Some people may not like this, but I sometimes say this a lot. I think we grew myopic, right? We're short-sighted.
Yeah.
There's two things here I would add from a lobbying perspective is oil and gas as an industry counted for the economy. We moved the GDP needle. We were employing people. We were doing things. We were expending capital. We were producing tax for the government. And I think it's been too easy for Aberdeen to think we're important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, I'm from Glasgow. I knew two people that worked in oil and gas when I was growing up, and both of them were scaffolders. So they weren't running any businesses or doing anything else. And they would come back every couple of weeks, and they had more cash than anybody else. And it was like, you want to work offshore, a scaffolder or roustabout or whatever you could get would be, as far as generating revenue and having a job and security. In Glasgow at that time, I think we had something like 32% unemployment, and you're hearing things about the North Sea. So I think when even for that, the money was very different. And when I came up here, my first job here was in recruitment. And I remember an 18-year-old phoned me up and told me that he wanted 40 grand a year. I think that was probably on about 18 grand a year. And this boy had done nothing, but his dad worked offshore and his uncle worked offshore. And he just had it in his head that he was going to get a job and get at least £40,000 a year. And maybe he did, not through me, but it was just that is kind of what people expected. It was just, that was normal.
I remember recruiting a dock controller from Dundee, and we doubled her salary.
Yeah.
And she turned up the next week, in a bigger car than I was driving, and I was like, I kind of just remember subconsciously looking at her and going, I'm not sure you got the memo.
Yeah.
Right?
I again, being in recruitment, I received a CV once of a carpet fitter from General George. And I still know this guy very well, and he's but I was sent his CV, not from him, I was sent it from the head of a department within one of the companies you work for. They sent me a CV and told me to fix the CV and send it back, because he was starting that day. He was the son of somebody else in the team. And I phoned him back and I said, what am I supposed to do with this CV? Like, you give me a clue, there's nothing here. And he said, basically just remove the carpet thing, put in, he said, some training at Nest Call on design, and send it back. But you'll be getting a PO for him later on today, because he's starting. And I guess when you see things like that come through, then there is a reason why people think almost expectation here sometimes. And no new, but in the past.
No, so I talked about being myopic. You're talking about coming from Glasgow. I came from Gloucestershire, right? And why did I come? Because there's an economic opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. And because I could do things here that I would probably never do elsewhere in the country.
Yeah.
Most of my friends from my first degree, they don't do anything in heavy and hazardous industry like this.
Yeah.
They still find it when I see them, not very often, they're kind of like, whoa, what is it that you guys are up to? And but that's why I'm talking about myopic. Most people in the general populace don't associate what we do with the fact when they fill up their car or they turn on their light switch, right?
Yeah.
They cannot associate the A with the B. Piper Alpha, Piper Alpha was a very prominent event. But that was probably the first time people really had oil and gas and hazard put in their face.
Yeah, but why would they? Because we probably do the same thing with other industries, don't we? You just use things.
I'm going to counter you in that most other industries are widely distributed.
Okay.
Right? They're not isolated and located. It's funny, isn't it? You and I have just talked about an economic opportunity that we pursued. We came here, we've made home here, and it feels something I'm very, very proud of. But it has to change.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen in many regions in many countries in the world, where you get something that bubbles up, is a wealth engine. There are very few...
For decades and decades.
For decades, right? But it also is temporal. It was never going to be a permanent thing. And the danger was, perhaps, we got it in our head that it was going to be a permanent thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember even going back even like 10 years ago, or maybe slightly longer, maybe like 2010 or something, and people would say, oh, there's still another 100 years in the North Sea. And that's becoming quite apparent 15 years later that that's not going to be the case. But even that's quite a short period of time ago. So people were still thinking, no, my son will work in oil and gas, and probably his son will work in oil and gas. And maybe they will in decommissioning or renewables or something in energy, but not the traditional oil and gas that they thought it would be for another 100 years.
Maslow's needs, right?
Yeah.
So you put having heat and light and food and protecting your own ahead of everything else. So people will focus on the short term and go, as long as I'm all right, everything will be okay on the back of that. There are people, they may be popular or unpopular, who work in policy, whose job is to kind of think about, well, what does the longer term picture look like? Yeah. And clearly at the moment in the UK, we've had quite a substantial change in policy just based on kind of one party's own interpretation of what they think. The irony is underneath all of this, we've already gone through 1.4 degrees of climate change, right? And, 1.5 was considered to be the real target. People talk about 3. Think how extreme our weather has become already, right? At 1.4 degrees C. So we do need to keep an eye on the longer term picture, which is we are going to have to do this transition. There's probably more hydrocarbons in the world than we need, is the truth. Climate change is ultimately going to be the real determinant of what we do. And the transition is amazing, right? We should want good things out of that. Yeah. If other generations can get the growth and the activity out of it that we've had out of hydrocarbons, good on them.
Yeah.
Great.
That would be a positive.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah. So we'll go back then. So transition. So you transitioned, you left Wellbore to Decom North Sea, and then that transition to Decommission. So what was the plan there? So
when I was approached by the board at Decom North Sea, they were like, we're looking for a new chief exec. And I said, I don't do, trade associations.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a...
It's a bit of a change.
A bit of a change for those of us who go through that change. David Whitehouse and others, I think we all quietly laugh at that. But at the end of the day, the board came along and said, would you be interested? And I went, I'm only interested if we really have an opportunity to revisit it and rebrand it, because you have already... The original foundations of it made sense. In the early 2000s, decommissioning was happening, and I talk about language where we say the buy side, the operator community, didn't really know what they needed.
Yep.
The supply chain didn't really know what they needed to put. So Decom North Sea was established as a kind of a bridge. How big is the market? What are the services are going to be needed? Decom North Sea established things like the work breakdown structure and other things that have gone on to become the norms. I'm not going to comment on the pricing of a training package from 10 or 15 years ago, but I will say Decom was a hot potato in that 14-15 cycle.
Yeah.
What we have now is a much more mature activity set. And so when I took on the trade association on behalf of the board, I said, okay, fair enough, but we have to rebrand and we have to talk about what are we really doing strategically.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, you and I have already touched on, the value of the international market, retaining a supply chain, retaining the skills.
Because it was almost an events company at one point, I think.
well, I think you're being harsh, but
I mean, maybe there was more going on, but from my side, I was in recruitment or whatever, and for me, I'm sure there was more stuff going on with the supply chain, but I was in recruitment, so the only thing we really saw was.
Let me take that on the head.
Events.
Right? Clearly, I've only been running it for 4 years, 5 years maybe, but so the role of a trade association is to network and to encourage networking, to be doing the lobbying and the talking and the discussion between the regulator and the providers and the needs, and just sort of say what's working, what's not making sense. Some of it is technical work groups and coming up with recommendations. What does best practice look like? How do we do this? A lot of what I do in my current role is actually out of public sight, right? I sit on various bodies and sit on various kind of industry meeting groups where we'll talk about risk, challenge, things that I can't talk about you here in public. But they're talked about. They're talked about with UK government.
They must have evolved a lot more as decommission has grown and become a bigger part of the sector, and also as Decom has grown itself as an industry.
The people, with the board, my language was you need to internationalize and we need to diversify. We need to accept that even in the North Sea, decommissioning will be a finite activity, right? But we're building capability that's got this international attraction to it, and we should be absolutely supporting it. I think in a funny way, I was a supply chain professional. I'd had stunning, really interesting, and also, let's be honest, all the interesting stuff is still offset by a lot of boring stuff. Yeah. That's what working life looks like.
Yeah, that's life.
Quite often explaining that to my children. You can't just have the up. You have to have a bit of the down. But there's a piece there. So I didn't expect to be a chief executive of a trade association. There are some sides to it that I'm still kind of getting used to, working with ministers and secretaries of state and others and their teams, and accepting the language of that and trying the pace at which that moves. Yeah. But the broader piece about best outcomes, good for employment, good for the environment, they fit my own personal attributes. Energy needs continue to grow globally. Energy is an astounding thing to work in. It's just that many of us have predominantly worked in oil and gas in the last 2 to 3, 4, 5 decades, right?
Yeah.
What energy is going to be in the next 5 decades is going to be different for that. And so it's just iterations of and developments through.
And when you talk about the internationalization piece, you must have seen a lot of North Sea supply chain companies that have tried to do decom abroad. What's the biggest challenges for them, for the supply chain to internationalize?
I suppose the first one is being able to identify the market. Am I going to Belize or am I going to Brazil?
Yeah.
And then you get into for some of those regions, they have different jurisdictions and different expectations. What is the maturity of their existing supply chain? What is their understanding on oil and gas? There are some famous examples. There's a couple of jobs been done in places like New Zealand, very remote, very small oil and gas industry, no incumbent capability to do decom. You end up with very, very high-end decommissioning cost because it's all traveling the world. You talked earlier about Pioneer Spirit going all the way to Australia.
Yeah.
ExxonMobil have a significant piece of work there for Pioneer Spirit to do, and it is worthwhile. Yeah, and as you've said, it's 120 days of sailing of the world's largest vessel in each direction in order to go.
Someone told me they were doing a lift every 9 days.
It's phenomenal.
Something ridiculous.
It's really, really impressive. But actually, the size of the lifts they're doing aren't even that big. It's just that there's volume there that justifies
enough to justify it. Yeah. And I guess spread that cost over the project. Yeah. For you yourself, then, for coming from EPC companies and Wellbore and Schlumberger or whatever into not-for-profit business, what's been the challenges for you?
I think you joked earlier about, being an events company. We're part an events company. Yep. We work sometimes with yourselves, we work on our own. We also have to do the stuff in private, speaking to ministers, working with OEUK and others and kind of saying, what is the right way forward? That is completely alien to most of us who work in supply chain. It's really, really easy to criticize a minister or a secretary of state, but actually when you have to have a meeting with a minister or secretary of state, there are certain things there's behaviors and expectations. And so it is a different part of it. What I love is spending time with actually member companies. Every time we do that, I'm off to do a lunch and learn after this. They'll tell me things that I don't know they're doing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'll tell them what I think the market looks like and where they should be, but they're going to say to me, do you realize we've just done this for a client? And I'll go, no. But then it's my job to travel around the world and go, do you know what? In Brazil, there's a business that could go and do that in Brunei. Or to a West Hill company, have you thought about going to Australia, and in particular Western Australia?
Yeah.
It's joining the dots. It's trying to add value, but it's also trying to do it on a not-for-profit basis.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful with our cash flow. We have to be really careful where we spend our time and effort.
Yeah. Okay. So going forward then, where is the opportunities for the decom market?
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say right here, right now, UK, right? I mean, there are the North Sea Transition Authority, UK, DESNZ and others would say, why the hell did Sam say it's not happening here? It is happening here. And there's going to be a substantial uptick, 27 through 32. We're probably going to do 60% of all of the decommissioning in the next 5 to 6 years here.
So is that a reason for the supply chain to hang around here and not move kit and everybody abroad?
I literally will get shouted at by other people if I say it's not happening here, right? I'm also not telling the truth. So that is the reality of it. But what we now have is the Australian market, which is much more time-bound and has legislation that says ye shall do, right?
Yeah.
Which we don't domestically in the UK. So there's a good degree of predictability in the Australian market. The Australia, if I had a nice little chart right now, whoosh, whoosh, AI chart pops up.
Yeah.
That chart would show that the North Sea decommissioning activity is going to go through a substantial growth. But at the same time, the Australian market has been growing in ascendancy for a while. The Australian market will be busy for approximately 6-7 years. Guess what? Same 6-7 years that we're probably looking for the UK.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, you have other regions like Brazil. Brazil and Petrobras are removing something like 18 FPSOs, but installing about another 25.
Yeah.
So the international play kind of waxes and wanes. I was at the Norwegian conference organized by NPF in January. The Norwegians are, probably as a result of supporting Europe so heavily in the last couple of years, are starting to see their decline in production coming forward a bit. And so we're going to see Norway becoming a practical decommissioning market, 2036, 37, 38.
Okay. So moving on from North Sea, Australia.
And in the meantime, the Gulf of America just kind of carries on as a under the Jones Act, its own market, because Jones Act means you can't put assets in and out very easily. So that's another mature market that carries on. So what will happen is other basins will come through. The Gulf states, they are already doing decom, but it will start to become more obvious. So many in the supply chain know that. New entrants or others, or maybe what's happening now is more like the tier 3s, the tier 4s, the specialist companies.
Yeah.
These are the guys who need a little bit more help.
Yeah, about education.
Yeah, awareness.
Yeah.
If you go to Australia, just be aware of X, Y, and Z, but your opportunities are A, B, and C.
Yeah.
If you go to Brazil, and we're doing a trade mission to Brazil later this year, who do you partner with in Brazil to really make money? Yeah. Don't just think you need to be working with Petrobras. If you're looking in Brunei, 20 years worth of work, but primarily with one client.
Yeah.
And so those are the things we're just trying to make sure that people have a common understanding of good and bad. But also my job is to say, please don't all leave, because if you all leave, it's going to get really, really tough
here. Yeah.
And let's be totally honest. The negatives are, it is an activity set that gets deferred. It is totally deployed on capital allocation by major IOCs and others.
Yeah.
And so why invest in decom when I could be investing in Guyana and doing production over there? But there are operators who have made very clear commitments. We are going to get on with our decommissioning in the North Sea. And so there is an underlying concern that will we have enough capability here when we really need it? We are currently underperforming on wells.
Yeah.
We're massively off the amount of P&A we should be doing. And the truth is, without dealing with the reservoir isolation, then we can't enable the rest of the decom activity either, right? And people need to remember the P&A, that piece where we're closing off the reservoir, it's a fundamental safety issue. It's a fundamental environmental issue. It's probably the greatest legal obligation on all of us. For oil and gas, we don't want to come back in 30, 40, 100 or 1,000 years' time and find that these reservoirs are leaking to some degree.
Yeah. So, moving away from decom, what do you do away from work? when you're not trying to get companies to stay here and work, or
so at home I'm very much referred to as the fun sponge, which is that a good thing? It's probably not a good thing, right?
yeah.
Actually, I'm a passionate cyclist, I'm a passionate runner, but one of the things my wife did kind of prompt me to do, and I'm very proud of, is we have spent 15 years doing what's called youth and junior coaching, so kind of club and Scottish, and arguably a little bit of kind of UK level.
Okay.
Kind of.
So how did you get involved in that?
I think
Being a cyclist to then running the under 18 club is a different thing.
no people. If you don't invest in the future, what are you investing in, right? You can ride your own bike to your like and go, I'm an amazing cyclist. But actually, the feedback and the process and the kind of that community engagement stuff to me has become really, really important about it. You know, the participation, the bringing in females, the competition side of it. I've always loved the competition side of it, great. And seeing athletes proceed all the way up through the ranks to become an athlete for GB is an amazing thing.
And have you achieved that?
Yeah, and it's not just me, team.
Yeah.
There's a team of 20 or 30 of us who've done that.
Wow.
But yes, we've put children all the way through into who are now in early stage careers. And that's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And we all have to have something out of work, Kenny.
Yeah. And is that a bit of that could have been me if you had the right training?
Oh, the psychological side of that.
Do you think if you had the same sort of training and you had the same passion and competitive spirit, do you think you could have been a professional cyclist?
No. I was wanting to be a farmer. That's how we started this conversation.
You'll need a tractor.
Far happier in a Fendt 9 series, right? As much as I love my riding. It's something I do. In fact, I've never been a golfer, right? And so in Decom, when we do our events, a bit like your events, we have a golf day, but then we'll have cycling, right? That's my day.
Yeah.
And what I really like that is, you talked about, for instance, the Port of Aberdeen earlier. Bob and I were going to catch up over a coffee and a quick bike ride later this week. I can't hit a golf ball for the love of money.
Yeah.
But I can ride up a mountain and ride back down the damn thing and still be chatting. And so it's important that people have stuff out of life, out of work, if you just work.
Yeah. And why the fun sponge then? Because your wife is fully supportive of the cycling club. So where do you get that title?
I don't know.
Are you just a moany guy in the house, or?
Oh, that's harsh. Maybe she would say yes. But relationships, yin and yangs, right?
Yeah.
And work versus life balance. My wife is very, very good at the home balance, and I mean she has a career, she does her own job and all that kind of stuff. But she's really, really good at being social. All the things I'm not. And the flashcards earlier, introvert, extrovert. I mean, I'm a classic male, right?
Yeah.
So I'm probably the fun sponge because I go, you can't do that. You should be, my son should be doing his homework, not playing golf.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my son's playing golf. What's wrong with that, for God's sake?
Yeah.
He's out with his mum, hitting some balls, and he's developing another skill set for the future.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. I'm still lost on the fun sponge, but
because I probably do say we shouldn't do that.
Yeah. A bit more stricter.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then we're in a bar, so if you were to sit down with anyone you could sit down with and have a chat, who would that be?
Oh my God. See, I'm probably incapable of coming up with an answer for.
Well, we've had a few. We've had an energy minister, we've had Billy Connolly, we've had some random answers. We had someone's friend who is no longer unfortunately here. So a right mix.
I think
we had Trump as well.
Yeah, that's not all no. Friends, because do you know what? Like we all tend to travel. We all tend to get very, very busy. But actually, that quality of life moment, the non-fun sponge stuff. You know, life is stressful, right? Yeah. And we talked about ups and downs in oil and gas and what comes with the good and what comes with the bad. And friendship's really, really important because it gets you through the good and the bad. This town is struggling at the moment. As a city, as a region, we face real, real difficulties. And so the importance of being social and not being the fun sponge sharing that, working together, spending time with people who aren't in oil and gas and whose view of the economy might be different. I find that stunning.
Yeah.
I could probably give you a list of very boring kind of economists and theoreticians and business people who I'd like to sit down and pick their brains on and go, why is this and why is that? I'm going to go back to my OPIC thing earlier. We can be or have been historically quite short-sighted.
Yeah.
I'm really, really keen on the macro, talking to broader people. I want people to understand what's going on in the energy transition globally. I want people throughout the UK to realize it's not just oil and gas, it's energy. It's really challenging. It's going to take a long time. They're quite passionate in that space. This is where the fun sponge comes in, because you're saying to me, you could have drunk at the table and have a whiskey with him, and I'd be like, no, I'd quite like to sit and talk about, I'd quite like to sit and talk about macroeconomics and what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, okay, I back your wife up on that. Yeah. Fair enough.
I would if I were you.
Sam, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You, Jenny.
Cheers.